Karen Handel.
All right, thank y'all very much. Good morning. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you. What a wonderful crowd this morning. I appreciate everybody coming out despite the weather and braving all of it. You know, I have spent the majority of my career in the business world, and one of the things that I was taught and I learned early on was this, that results matter. And I think that that's a lesson that really needs to be applied to elected officials as well. Results matter. And we have a time of complete and total gridlock in Washington, D.C. We have individuals who, they do nothing but manage from crisis to crisis. They kick the can down the road just to get through and to another election. We need to have individuals who are going to stand up and fight for what really needs to be done in this country to get us back on track. You know, the dysfunction in D.C. has almost become normal, and that is just unacceptable. And we're going to have to change that, and the only way to change that is to bring new people in and new leadership for what we're going to do. It's sort of, I call it Washingtonitis. Washington has become a way of life for the career politicians and frankly for the business insiders who we all know through the political action committees in K Street are part of the drivers of what's going on in Capitol Hill. It is not enough to vote no. It is not enough to just slap your name on a bill as a co-sponsor. It is not enough to make up excuses that, oh, we're not in the majority. Results matter. And let's take a look at where we are. We have reckless spending that has given us a $17 trillion debt. We are overtaxed. We are overregulated. We have the federal government telling us what our health care is going to be. We have the federal government telling us how we're going to educate our kids. We have the IRS scandal. We have Benghazi. We have our own government spying on us. Enough is enough. It is time to say we're not going to take it anymore. So what do we hear? We hear exactly what I said. Well, I voted no. I introduced a bill. Well, don't blame me. It's the Democrats in the majority. Well, folks, the truth is, the hard truth, is that when Republicans had a chance to do things differently, we didn't. And we are where we are today. It didn't happen overnight. We're where we are today because of what I will call some accommodating Republicans. And in this race, you do have a decision to make because elections are about choices. We have career politicians and corporate business insiders who want to go to Washington, and believe you me, they've already been there a combined 42 years. What difference is it going to make to go from this side of the Capitol to the other side of the Capitol? Not a amount of difference whatsoever. I am a results-oriented person, and we are just 3 months out. 3 months out from voting starting. And so all we're going to hear about is who's the true conservative in this race. But I have a different question for you. Who's the proven conservative in this race? Who's the individual with a proven track record of actually putting conservative principles to work and getting the job done? And you're looking at her. I have a track record of results. It started, I had in the business world, I worked at CBavision and KPMG. I have run a small business. A chamber is a small business. When I came into the North Fulton Chamber of Commerce, the organization, after about a few months, I discovered was on the brink of bankruptcy. Literally on the brink of bankruptcy. I had to go to the board. I had to tell them what was going on. The finance director had been embezzling money for 7 years before I got there. Talk about some folks being asleep at the wheel. And I had to put my personal reputation on the line. It was one thing for that chamber board to have confidence in me to run the organization when things were good, but something entirely different for that chamber board to remain confident in me, to actually lead that chamber from the very worst of days back to stability. And I did. I put my personal reputation on the line with the bank to secure a line of credit so that we could keep the doors open. It took us 2 years, but in 2 years we were able to repay every dime we had to borrow, and today that chamber is still open and thriving and doing what chambers and communities, local communities do all around the state and the country, create jobs and help small businesses. When I came in as chairman of the Fulton County Board of Commissioners, I faced a $100 million budget deficit. Now keep in mind, in Fulton County, that is a commission that is controlled by the Democrats. They had 4 votes that could do everything and anything they wanted. They had a budget on the table with a $3 million property tax increase. Now I could have decided to just be political and have a lot of really good political sound bites that would have made the AJC really happy. But instead, I went to work because I know that results matter. We went through that budget with a fine-tooth comb, and I was smart and strategic in prioritizing programs and finding cuts. I understood how to negotiate with my colleagues on the commission. I understood exactly who had what hot button, how far I could push them, and how I could cut, how much cuts I could take in certain areas. And in the end, we were able to fill that $100 million budget deficit by cutting spending, not by raising taxes, and I did that without the benefit of a Republican majority, and I did it every single year that I was chairman of that Fulton County Board of Commissioners. That's leadership, folks. When I came in, when you gave me the extraordinary privilege to be your next Secretary of State, the first elected Republican Secretary of State, I again had to face a 20% reduction in the budget. And I went and I did that. It meant that there were some things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do. For example, having new voting equipment. But I made arrangements around that to work with the election center to put in place stronger protections and stronger security measures for our voting equipment. I took on the Obama Justice Department and all of the liberal alphabet soup groups out there who didn't want us to do photo ID. Made sure we had an implementation plan to get it implemented. I made sure that I took them on to make sure that we did verify citizenship to ensure that only U.S. citizens were going to vote in our elections in the state of Georgia. Again, that's leadership, and that's the kind of leadership that I'm going to bring to the United States Senate. I know how to get things done in the toughest of times, and we have a lot of things that we need to get done. We need to cut spending and deal with the deficit first and foremost, because we've got to do that in order to get our fiscal house in order and then start to deal with what I'll call prosperity initiatives. We need to get serious about spending. It is not that complex, folks. It's hard. It's hard because it's hard to make cuts in a budget, because one thing to cut somebody else is going to really like. But that's what we have to do. Having a $17 trillion debt and being upside down on our budget is unacceptable. Do you know the last time we had a balanced budget? Bill Clinton, under Bill Clinton. These folks right now in Washington, they haven't given us a budget in 4 years, in almost 4 years, and the one we just got, they tried to tell us it was a good deal. It was a bad deal. All of us can do math, right? Well, we add up the numbers. It increases spending. It increases spending. And time again, we are told, let us do some things now. Just give us a chance to do this, and we'll get some cuts down the road. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to do the cuts. We get a report every single year, some 300 different programs that we need to look at and could look at and cut. For example, why are we spending upwards of $20 million a year on economic development in Morocco? I got nothing against Morocco. I just don't think our tax dollars ought to be spent on economic development in Morocco. Why did we spend almost $1 million to build a fancy lighted soccer field at Guantanamo Bay so suspected terrorists could play soccer at night? Why do we have 2 catfish inspection programs? Why? Payment processing. That's one of the real niches for Georgia in terms of corporate growth in our state. That segment of business is regulated by 19 different federal agencies. 19 for one industry. This is absurd, and we've got to do things better. We need to move to a 2-year budget cycle, and that will give us an opportunity, one, to stop going to the cliff every year, number one. Number two, it'll let us focus not just on how much money the federal government is going to spend, but have a focus on what we're spending, why we're spending it. Is it an efficient, effective spend? Is it a duplicative, redundant spend? Then we need to have zero-based budgeting across every single agency. Roll them through that process at least once a decade. Imagine how we could shrink the footprint and the size of the federal government if we did that just once every 10 years for every agency. Then we look for those areas, yes, exactly. We look for those areas of duplicative programs, redundant programs, programs that were put in place that were always meant to be temporary in nature. For example, rural airport program, seed monies that were put in place probably 30, 40 years ago to help rural communities have an airport. I have no problem with one-time dollars to help someone get off the ground, but we ought not to be subsidizing routes in this country. Up to 90% of the cost of the route. We've been doing that for 30 years. If we're subsidizing it to that point, folks, there's not a market for it. We don't need to do it. People probably just need to consider driving. Then we need to have an across-the-board audit of the regulatory system. Across the board. Let's start with the EPA. We need to look at these regs. They've been on the books for 10, 20, 30 years and put in place a sunset law so that every single reg is going to sunset after 10 years unless Congress takes a specific action to renew it, because that gives us an opportunity to look at the impact and the implications of what we're doing. Too many of these folks in Washington, heck, I don't even think they read most of the bills that come across their desk. That's the least we ought to expect from them for the salary that we're paying them with our tax dollars. So we have a lot of work to do. On the tax side, you know, a lot of people talk about tax reform. I think we've been nibbling around the edges too much. The tax code is an absolute disaster. We need to scrap the code, rewrite it, scrap the IRS, repeal the 16th Amendment, and get moving on the fair tax now. And to all the candidates that are going to stand up here and say, well, I hope co-sponsor the fair tax. Well, you know what? What have you done? Not a single thing. It is about results. We have momentum at the local level across states around this country on the fair tax. We got to leverage that. What I know is this: having the highest corporate tax rate among all industrialized nations in the world is a competitive killer for our companies. And when it comes to Obamacare, I'm not interested in more, quote, delays or fixes. It needs to be repealed immediately. But just as important, as conservatives, we have to talk about what we're for also when it comes to health care reform. And what I am for is a patient-centered, market-driven health care reform, like what Congressman Tom Price has offered in H.R. 2300. It has portability of your plans. It does establish a high-risk pool for those with pre-existing conditions. You know, I think in this country, aren't we a fortunate and blessed people that medical innovation has enabled so many people who just 10 years ago would have died from various illnesses, sicknesses, or accidents, and today they're not just alive, but they're actually thriving. And we're a smart people, an innovative people. We can figure out a way to deal with that with high-risk pools, more robust health savings accounts, and very importantly, more tort reform so that we can start to get control over defensive medicine, which is one of the biggest drivers of health care costs in this country. And oh, by the way, we need to get the federal government out of the middle of educating our children. Stop Common Core now. So it is a crowded field for United States Senate. But I think there's two questions that we have to ask ourselves in addition to who's the proven conservative. One, who is the individual in this race that you can actually trust to get the job done? Is it really individuals who have spent together 42 years in Congress? Haven't they had ample time to do whatever it is they say they want to do now? Just a question. And then the second, equally as important, we better nominate the individual who has the best opportunity to beat Michelle Nunn. And on both counts, I am that candidate. We have to have a results-oriented person, an individual who is not afraid to stand up and fight when the cause is right, an individual with a track record of actually getting the job done, of putting conservative principles into place, a person who not only talks the talk, but has shown time and time again that she is willing to walk the walk. And when it comes to beating Michelle Nunn, we have to have an individual who is going to be strong, who has been tested, who has been vetted. And I'm the only candidate in this race who has run statewide. I'm the only candidate in this race who has been under the kind of scrutiny that comes with the statewide race. And I'm also the only candidate in this race that multiple news outlets have said is the strongest individual to face Michelle Nunn. So folks, we have a very important decision to make, because we know that a majority in the Senate runs right through Georgia. And I'm going to end on a note of optimism and then take your questions. The problems that we have and the challenges that we have in this country can be daunting. I was at a speech a couple of weeks ago and an individual asked me this question. He said, what's left of American exceptionalism? And I think the answer to that is up to each and every one of us in this room and every conservative in this state. We have a decision to make. We have to decide, are we going to be strong? Are we going to make the hard decisions that generations before us have made? Because what will be our legacy? Are we going to leave a legacy of reckless spending and crushing debt, diminishing freedoms? I'm not willing to sit on the sidelines and watch this great country become one of mediocrity, because I know that only in America could we be having this meeting. Only in America could each and every one of us have had the opportunity to be successful and be whatever it is we wanted to be when we were growing up. This country is great, and we are a great people, and we'll do what we need to do. I know that only in America could I be standing before you this morning to ask for your vote to be your next United States Senator. I left home when I was 17 to move out of an abusive environment. I finished up high school. I went to college at night. I worked really, really hard. And it is because of a great country and a great God that afforded a young girl extraordinary opportunities to succeed and be successful in however I define that. And that's what this election is about, not for us, but for my nieces, 8 or 9 and 10-year-old now, Hannah and Sarah, and for your children and their grandchildren, so that we can make sure that this country always remains the greatest land of opportunity and the greatest land of the free. So I ask for your vote, but know this, I'm going to work very hard to earn it. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless this extraordinarily great country.
Okay.
Is this mine? Great.
The most important thing for us to maintain in this country is our freedom. If you maintain freedom, other things will follow.
That's right.
And the fact that you mentioned God and freedom and education, it all falls right into line. If we can get those things in line, what would you do about the problem with my age person having all these tests that are unnecessary up in our bill?
You're talking about on health care, yes.
Yeah.
You know, I think that that's where tort reform comes into place. I was reading something a few weeks ago that for Medicare, we spend about $1 billion a day in Medicare costs, and it's estimated that about 30% of those costs are for tests and procedures that really aren't deemed medically necessary. That is a lot of money, folks, and so tort reform is going to help us with that. You mentioned freedoms, and one of the things that as legislation is introduced, you know, almost always there is what's called a fiscal note, some sort of financial analysis that comes with legislation. I think we ought to also have a constitutional test that goes with that as well.
Next question. Oh, just to let you know, we're allowing a 2-minute answer. So if you hear Phil Robertson's duck call, that means it's time to wrap up the answer. Move to the next question. Angela, go ahead.
Hi, Karen.
Hey. Hi, Angela.
From Fayette County. As a former Secretary of State and Senate candidate, there are many of us in the state of Georgia that are very, very concerned about the electronic voting machines that don't have any paper trail, so we can validate the tabulation is fair and accurate. We have a third-party company, Seidel, counting our votes now. Brian Kemp says he's not going to do anything about it. It has to be done legislatively to fix this problem. Are you not concerned as a candidate that you have no way to get an official recount of votes with a paper trail? And what can you do to help us promote legislation that will fix that?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there is a paper trail in the electronic voting machines. And to clear up a couple of things, someone has been going around saying that I was the individual who put the machines in place. That is not true, folks. Kathy Cox, Democrat Kathy Cox, rolled out the current equipment. And it's what we have, and we have to make the most of it. Because it is about a $100 million initiative to replace all of them, which was why having new security measures developed so that we had much stronger testing and setup and stronger things on the back end was really important to me when I was Secretary of State. Do we need new equipment? Yes, we are rolling into the time. I mean, even if we thought these were the best machines ever, technology has a lifespan, and we're coming up on the end of them. So there needs to be some plan put in place, and I would encourage you to have Secretary Kemp come and talk about it. But there needs to be some plan put in place to start to roll roll out new equipment. And what I would hope is, what I would be advocating for is new equipment that has a much more robust voter verified paper trail, which is different from just a plain, exactly, voter verified. And next generation, that's right, we do not. And next generation equipment does have that. I've not seen anything, I've not looked at all of it, but most of the equipment that I'm aware of does have that, and so any next generation would have that. Yeah.
How expensive is it to do what several states are doing and have paper ballots?
Ma'am, paper ballots is when we had the most voter fraud ever in this state. People were going to jail left and right about it. You look, you know, no system is ever 100%. Oh yeah, but that's just what they caught. Well, actually, under my tenure, we were, I believe we were the most aggressive when it came to voter fraud and tracking it down. I had an inspector general, the first that the state ever had. Unfortunately, we don't have that now specifically dedicated to voter fraud and investigating it so that we could be very aggressive on it. Yeah.
Well, I saw a thing, and actually I kept it, of a guy testifying, I think it was in Ohio, where he was a programmer that programmed machines to determine who won and by what percentage. I think that's what people are worried about. There's no way to verify that when I voted, that somehow that computer isn't regurgitating that information.
That's just not true, and I don't know what testimony you're talking about, but that is just patently not true. You have
programmable, that a programmer could do that.
You, ma'am, machines are set up by people, and so there are logic and accuracy testing, etc. I'm not even going to go into all of the security measures that were put in place under me, because if I tell you all of them, they're no longer security measures. But with that said, there are very serious security measures, and we actually have had several people in this state who didn't follow the procedures, and they either lost their jobs at the local level or they faced very serious fines around it. But I saw absolutely nothing during my time as Secretary of State that gave me pause about anyone being able to do something like that. What I will also say, keep in mind that electronic voting equipment is, you know, it is, you see these things about people who have been able to go in and do things to them. It is a little bit like an ATM machine. If an ATM machine were put in the middle of this room and you had unfettered access to it with no other security measures around it, I am 99% sure that every single one of you in this room would ultimately get some cash out of it. So it's the same concept.
Next question,
Here.
Dave Riley.
Dave.
Hi. My question is about Social Security. It's going to be a big issue with all people retiring and everything else. Now, Bill Clinton, you said, you know, he had a balanced budget. Well, he also put in place the tax Social Security back in the early 90s and made it mandatory that you had to pay into Social Security. It wasn't voluntary. Now there's over $6 trillion now in IOUs sitting in Social Security from our federal government that owes back, and not one dime of interest has been paid back to the people for borrowing. Just say, for instance, me, 35 years of working, not one dime of interest has been paid back. But when I retire, I have to pay tax on Social Security money throughout. So where's the fairness, and what can be done, or what do you feel that can be done instead of having just a small increase? These people spent our money, gave it away. How do we go back and say, now we want our money back and fight for it? It's going to be a big issue for a lot of people retiring, especially me and everybody else. And our children are going to have nothing when they're ready to go, but they're still mandatory to pay in. So,
well, as we deal with Social Security reform, which is going to be obviously a big issue, I think that we have to come to some place around some guiding principles, if you will. One being that individuals who are either at retirement, currently drawing, or near that age, we need to meet the commitments that we've made to them. And then look at reforms, additional health savings or private savings accounts, etc., for people in the younger ages, because what we have right now is unsustainable. Can we go back and undo something that was done 20 years ago? I mean, I'm willing to look at that, but I think that's probably going to be tough. But we need to have serious reforms going forward and make sure that we do meet the commitments to the people that are at or near, and then work on reforms for the go forward.
That's why they're pushing the 401ks, but right now there's $18 trillion in 401k money right now that the federal government's actually looking to borrow against. borrow it from you just like they're borrowing from your Social Security and then stealing that basically, because if they can't pay back the one thing, they're not necessarily going to pay back.
That's right. Well, and that gets all the way back to what I started out at the very beginning, getting our fiscal house in order, and all of these issues have to be on the table. I mean, it's almost sort of this perpetual sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul mentality of what we're doing things. And why? Because we have people in Washington that their #1 goal is the following: to get re-elected. Why do you think we haven't had any forward movement on rewriting the tax code? It's because the big corporate interests, the Washington business insiders, they don't want to rewrite the tax code. Why would they? It benefits them. So, I mean, we have people that all they care about is the Washington way of life, and you can see it across the board on all of these folks. He had a question behind you first. Yeah.
Go ahead. All right. You keep talking about your competitors and how...
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. You keep talking about your competitors and how they have 42 years of experience. Nothing's been changed. I think it's a little misleading because not all of them are like that. There are some that are, but yes, there are some that are not as well. The question that I have, and I think the biggest problem we face with our two current senators is the fact that they abandon their principles, Republican principles, in the face of party leadership too often, or they're not standing up for their principles. So can you tell me about a time when you actually stood up for principle in the party?
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, you know, the people running in this race are all fine men. They love this state, and I applaud that and commend them for that. They have together served 42 years. And standing up for principle and voting no and getting nothing done is not a result. It is unacceptable, and we deserve better than that. How many of you in your jobs were allowed to go down the hall to your boss and say, you know what, I said no, I tried. Would you get a promotion? If you were a salesperson and you had a sales number that you had to meet at the end of the year, you maybe were allowed to not meet it 1 year, but you certainly weren't going to get a promotion from it. So it is not enough to just stand on principle and vote no. You have to stand on principle and still be able to move the ball to get things done. For me at Fulton County, I have multiple examples. As Fulton County Commission Chairman, I could have stood on principle about that budget with the 3 mil tax increase and voted no. I could have easily voted no. But what would have been the result? And I probably would have gotten a lot of political play out of voting no. But the result would have been a tax increase for the people of Fulton County. So I went to work, and I never once compromised principle. What I did was understand how to negotiate, how to move the ball. It is like football. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be the first female NFL football player. It's a true story. I really did. I love football that much. But I bring football up for the following reason. Because it is a lot like problem solving. The teams that win the big games, the teams that win national championships, the teams that win the Super Bowl, they do not win by going long on every play. They win by being smart and strategic, by doing what Margaret Thatcher said. And you probably asked me that same question, and she is someone's leadership style I look at. Relentless incrementalism. Because if you're not in the majority, you have to figure out a way to move the ball down by down by down. And that's called leadership. That's called getting things done, not compromising principle.
Karen, I think we all would send the cook in the back of the kitchen to Washington if we were convinced they could bring results. And your examples are compelling. You have a compelling story. But you were the executive in all this. You were the head guy, head of the chamber, head of the Secretary of State, head of the Fulton County Commission, as one of 100 senators, with a guy who's charming in Las Vegas named Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer, who hate everything we stand for. How does that kind of head guy executive leadership experience translate into getting things done when all the other people we've sent, as you said, aren't getting the results?
Right. Well, first of all, Fulton County Commission Chairman is not executive, it's legislative. I didn't run, I mean, we had a county manager, and so I had to figure out a way to get 4 votes to do anything. And have you met Emma Darnell? No. I don't know. I'm not sure who would be the stronger between her and Harry Reid, but look, we need people who We need people who understand how to get things done, regardless of what the circumstances are. And you either have that ability to do it or you don't. And I would submit that the individuals running in this race, they have shown time and time again that they can't get anything done. They vote no, yes, and I applaud people who stand by their convictions on it. But still, we have a $17 trillion debt. Think about this. One of the individuals has been in Congress for almost 20 years. Under his time, the debt has gone from $4 trillion to $17 trillion. $4 trillion to $17 trillion. We are where we are because of both Republicans and Democrats who simply have not been able to get the job done. And for those of you who want to know, well, are you going to cave in? I have a record of standing firm, not caving in. I took on a corrupt sheriff in Fulton County when everyone told me not to. She was the first elected female black sheriff in the country. I was told if you do this, this will be the end of you, but she misappropriated $7 million, so I stood up, I took her on. I didn't have any way to get her out of office, but I made it my business to find the path to force her out, and ultimately I did. When it came to pro-abortion bullies coming after Susan G. Komen for the cure, I stood firm there as well. I put my principles in that case ahead of my paycheck.
Aaron?
Question on foreign policy outside of the financial crisis that we're facing now, like more traditional foreign policy issues. Can you give me a current or recent former senator that you would emulate in your foreign policy decisions?
You got an example?
Yeah, I don't know what you're...
Would you agree with like things that John McCain does, or would you agree with things that Rand Paul does?
I would say I'm more in the Rand Paul area. Look, the overriding driver for what we do from a foreign policy standpoint has to be U.S. American interests. Period. End of paragraph. And our interests. That's why when it came to Syria, I very quickly said I was not for direct military intervention there, because a compelling case had not been articulated to us, the American people, about why we would be there, what were our interests. And there also has to be some sort of, end game, strategic goal. We can't just keep investing year after year after year and never accomplish anything either. Who else? Yeah.
This is sort of a statement as well as a question. It may not be something you can answer right now. But conservatives pretty much have to deal with liberals on a touchy-feely situation. Have you or have some of your supporters come up with some ideas how to deal with the touchy-feely emotional dialogue when conservatives tend to be more fact-based, but the general population votes more on feelings?
That's a really good question. For conservatives and the GOP, I think, if anything, we do tend to talk in numbers a lot more, and our message can sometimes be a little sterile. Well, yes, logic and numbers. I agree with that, and common sense. But still, we have to have individuals who can articulate our policies and our principles into what it means for people with their everyday life. And I think on Obamacare, one of the things that Ted Cruz did extraordinarily well in all of that was to help people see what the real life impact in your family at your kitchen table was going to be from Obamacare. And that's what we have to do. And we have to make sure that not just good messengers or good messages, because that's not enough. We have to have articulate messengers so that we're not, saying things that are going to give the other side all the ammunition they need to come after us. People who understand how to be authentic with individuals. It's not easy for me, frankly, to talk about things from my childhood and my personal things. That's very, very personal. But I do it because I think it conveys to people that I'm not so different from most of you in this room. We have all had, our ups and downs and stories in our lives and the things that helped to shape us, because after all, we are the sum of all the things that have happened to us, right? And I think it's important to have elected officials who can relate on that level with folks. And we have to, as conservatives, be a little more open to talking on a personal level like that.
We have questions, like you said, we were asked before. If a bill were submitted to Congress, which is very popular with the constituency, like a new Patriot Act right after another terrorist attack, or something of that nature, popular with the people, popular in Congress, but you come in your heart, you knew it was unconstitutional, was not a enumerated power, yay or nay?
I would be a nay, and as I said, I'd like to see legislation have some sort of a constitutional brief associated with it. I think that would help us a lot, and it would also help us as we look at the budget too and how we're going to cut things, since it gives us a guide, a pathway, if you will, for how to cut things.
You mentioned this briefly. Name a political philosopher like Jefferson, Russell Kirk, Thomas Sowell, John Locke, and whose writings have influenced your political philosophy and governance style.
Well, I think the two people who have most influenced me, really, I mean, Margaret Thatcher, for most young women, was an extraordinarily influential individual on our lives, and her take of relentless incrementalism was something that really I lived by at Fulton County. Then secondly, you know, Reagan, and it is a bit of a, everyone always says Reagan, but when he was the first president that I was able to vote for when I turned 18 in 1980, and as I was moving out on my own and getting a job and trying to figure out what was life going to hold for a girl who was 17 and on her own, and I was a really good student in high school, but I wasn't going to be able to go to college full time despite being almost straight A's, all those things. It was a scary time for me to try to figure out what on earth could the future hold for someone like me. And here was a man who stood before our country, and if you really look at his inaugural address, his first inaugural address, you see a great deal of parallels of then to now in terms of expansion of government, citizen dissatisfaction with how the growth of federal government, and also the economic climate. And he told this country that our best days were ahead. And you bring up the mud and the dirt. Oh, and by the way, just the electoral math, I'm very lucky that I'm from Metro Atlanta. 70% of the primary vote is north of I-20. And that's just the math of where the votes are in this state. In North Georgia, that's a big opportunity for me against Governor Deal, who had represented that area for a long time. I still took 47+% of the vote. I won a couple of counties in North Georgia. I have the highest name ID of any candidate in this race. I'm a known quantity to people. I'm a known quantity, and people know that I am a hard worker. I get the job done if given the opportunity. And number three, there isn't a harder working candidate out there. So I feel very good about getting in the runoff, and then we'll go from there. Winning in November, look, I think it's clear that they're going to do all the things, but someone asked me, Karen, what do you think your opponents are going to say about you? And it always makes me laugh because, well, if you Google, folks, everything that's going to be said about me has already been said. So good luck with coming up with something new there. The other thing is just having, I'd laugh, it's never been cooler to be the gal running, and to have me against Michelle Nunn, that can't really do much about a war on woman kind of thing there. Number two, two women running against one another essentially splits up the female vote, and guess what, guys? Rock on, you're the swing vote again.
We got time for one more question and we'll have to wrap up. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Talk about term limits.
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you asked that. I have already said, I said from the day I got in this race, early on in this race, that I will serve 2 terms. That is 12 years. If I don't get the job done in 12 years, you need to boot me out anyway. And I'm going to be a champion for term limits. And that's the other thing. I mean, think about it as a woman, a conservative woman from the South. It will be a unique opportunity to be a champion on a lot of issues. And I would ask for the folks in this race, what have they really been champions for? We need a champion for getting our fiscal house in order. We need a champion for the Constitution. We need a champion for term limits. We frankly need a champion for you. So I ask for your vote. I need your help in this race. Sign up. Devin back here has a sign-up sheet. Take a bumper sticker, or you can go to KarenHandel.com. I'll hang around for a little bit longer if you have some more questions, but thank y'all so much.